Have you ever, really paused to think about that morning ritual, that first cup of coffee, or maybe the one that gets you through the afternoon slump? What if I told you that simple drink connects you to this massive global industry? Second only to oil, really.
Right.
We're doing a deep dive into coffee today, and its journey is way more complex than you'd probably guess.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we're setting out to explore how this single cherry fruit became such a global force. It touches almost everything, doesn't it? The biology, the farming, society, economies, even, our own bodies.
Right, and we've got some great sources to help us unpack it all. We're looking at the Papua New Guinea Coffee Handbook, fantastic detail on the farming side, and also Caffeine Chronicles, which is a YouTube series giving that broader historical and body science view. Prepare for some, well, unexpected links. We're talking goats,
Mm-hmm.
the Boston Tea Party, and even spider webs. Seriously,
Quite a story.
let's just jump right in. So, okay, we all call them coffee beans, but that's not quite the full picture, is it? What are we actually brewing? Where do they come from?
You've hit on the first, common misconception right there. What we call a bean. It's actually the seed. It comes from this fruit, this little red thing called a coffee cherry. And the tree itself, especially Arabica, the popular one, it's a bit of a diva, biologically speaking. Really particular. Think about its roots first. There's this strong main taproot. Yeah, goes deep. But then there are others branching out, some reaching, maybe 3 meters down. It's this whole complex
Multi
network.
meters. Wow.
Yeah, all searching for water, for nutrients. That's why the soil is just so incredibly important for quality coffee.
Okay, that sounds super sensitive underground. What about above ground, the parts we actually see?
Well, you've got the main stem shooting upwards, pairs of these glossy green leaves. They last maybe 8 to 10 months. But the flowers, that's where it gets really fascinating. They don't just pop up whenever. Their development is triggered by something very specific,
Mm-hmm.
rain. But only after the plant's been a bit stressed for moisture.
Ah, so it needs that dry spell first.
Exactly. It's like it's waiting, holding its breath for that perfect signal.
Mhm.
And then, boom, flowers. But only for about 2 days.
Just 2 days. That
Well-
seems incredibly short for something so vital.
It is a really tight window, but that short bloom kicks off this really long process. From that flower opening, it's going to take anywhere from, say, 8 to 11 months.
8 to 11.
Yeah, for that little green cherry to grow, mature, and turn that classic red color.
Hmm.
Inside, the seed our bean is developing, gaining weight. Usually there are 2 flat seeds face to face in a cherry, but sometimes you just get one, a round one. That's called a pea berry.
Okay.
And each seed is wrapped in layers. Skin, then pulp, then this papery parchment layer, and a thin silver skin before you finally get to the green bean itself.
That's
Yeah.
an incredible amount of detail just in the plant's life cycle.
Yeah.
Really shows why growing coffee is such a science, doesn't it? So much more involved than just, planting a seed.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so you've got these tiny seedlings.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get them from that delicate nursery stage into the field successfully?
Right. That transition is critical. It really starts back in the nursery with meticulous care. Often seedlings get transplanted when they reach the butterfly stage. That's when their first little seed leaves, the cotyledons have opened up. Kind of looks like butterfly wings.
Oh, okay.
And where you germinate them matters. Many farmers prefer sand beds over just regular soil. Why? Well, sand tends to give you faster, more even germination, and usually fewer pest problems.
Makes sense.
Then for growing them out, you've got choices. Bare root nurseries are cheaper, easier to move seedlings around initially, but the downside is higher transplant shock when they go into the field. Pollocking pots cost more, but the seedlings establish much better,
Right, less shock.
especially if they need to travel a long way to the final planting site.
Okay, so seedlings are ready, strong. Now, picking the spot. The P&G handbook really stresses site selection for Arabica. What makes a site, perfect?
Yeah, it's like finding that Goldilocks zone. Several things are absolutely critical. First, drainage and soil depth. We talked about those deep roots. They need space, at least half a meter of good soil, and it absolutely must drain well. Coffee hates sitting in water.
Wet feet.
Exactly. Then altitude. This is huge for Arabica. It cannot handle frost, period. And temperature matters a lot. It likes warmth, but too hot. Say consistently over 25 Celsius, growth slows down. Over 30, you can get leaf damage.
Wow.
So that's why you see the best Arabica in specific altitude bands, like in PNG, often between 1,300 and maybe 1,700 meters.
Got it. A temperature sweet spot and good drainage. What else?
Rainfall. Need a good amount, but not too much. Ideally somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 millimeters a year. Then you have to think about erosion. Steep slopes, bare soil, big risks, especially with heavy rain. How you manage the farm makes a difference too. High input systems, lots of weeding, can sometimes increase erosion. Low input, more ground cover, tends to protect the soil better.
Right.
Soil fertility obviously is important, though on high input farms, they often plan to supplement with fertilizers anyway. And then there are practical things like how easy is it to get to the site? What's the land used for now? Less scientific, but still important factors.
Okay.
So you assess all these things, score them, and that tells you if a site is really suitable, say S1, S2, S3, or just N, not suitable, and helps decide if it's better for high or low input farming.
Okay, site chosen. Next up is clearing and prepping the land. You mentioned methods can really impact the soil.
They definitely can. Clearing might be manual slashing or using machinery. For those big high-input commercial farms, preparation often involves deep plowing, harrowing, maybe several times, really turns over the soil. But for many smallholders, especially low-input systems, it's more about minimal disturbance, just
Yeah.
clearing what's necessary.
Less impact.
Yeah. Then you figure out spacing, how far apart to plant the trees. Depends on the variety. The system's square, rectangular, hedgerow. Recommendations might suggest something like 2,600 or 2,700 trees per hectare for typical Arabica talls. Gives them room, but maximizes land use.
So the young coffee trees are finally in the ground, but they're not just left alone, right? How do you manage them during those critical first few years? Seems like they'd need a lot of care.
Oh, absolutely. Think of it like raising a toddler. Those early years are fundamental for their future health and productivity. Nutrition is key from the start. Good planting holes, then specific fertilizer schedules, for year 1, year 2, feeding them what they need as they grow. And weed control, super important, especially in about a 50-centimeter radius around the young plant. Weeds compete fiercely for water and nutrients. Farmers might use mulch to suppress weeds, do careful hand weeding, or use herbicides very selectively. There are different types contact killers, others that the plant absorbs. Need to be careful not to harm the coffee tree itself.
And do they grow anything else alongside the young coffee? Or use other plants to help?
Yes, definitely. Intercropping is quite common. You can plant cover crops.
What do those do?
They help smother weeds, protect the soil from erosion, and if they're legumes, they can actually add nitrogen back into the soil. Win-win.
Smart.
And in the first couple of years, before the coffee trees get too big, farmers often intercrop with food crops. Things like cabbage, onions, maybe peanuts or bananas. Gets more value from the land while waiting for the coffee.
Makes sense.
Shade trees are also really important, especially in many systems. Trees like leucaena or casuarina provide shelter. They help moderate temperature extremes, reduce stress on the coffee plant, can lead to more stable yields over time.
Right.
And of course, pruning begins early too. Shaping the young tree, guiding its growth for good structure and future bean production.
It's so clear how vital those early years are. But what about once the trees are mature? The care doesn't stop there, surely.
Not at all. It's a continuous process, but it shifts focus. And it really depends on the management level. You've got your high input, often unshaded commercial plantations aiming for maximum yield. And then your lower input, usually shaded, actively managed smallholder farms. The biggest difference, often fertilizer. Especially for unshaded coffee, consistent nutrition is critical to sustain those high yields. They might use specific NPK ratios, like 8.5 to 1 to 8.5 based on analysis.
So targeted feeding.
Exactly. Using compound fertilizers or sometimes specific nutrients if soil or leaf tests show a deficiency. And here's a neat sustainability angle. Recycling coffee skins. Remember the pulp removed during processing?
Yeah.
It's actually a fantastic organic fertilizer, really rich in potassium and nitrogen. Composting it makes it easier to use and great for building soil health. A perfect example of closing the loop.
That's brilliant. Using the waste product.
Precisely. And then for mature trees, pruning continues, but it's more about maintenance. Annually removing lower branches that might drag on the ground, getting rid of suckers, those vigorous vertical shoots, thinning out dense growth to let light and air in. All helps maintain bean quality and makes harvesting easier.
So even with all this meticulous care, from planting to pruning, coffee plants still face threats, right? Diseases, pests. Sounds like a constant battle.
It really is. They're vulnerable. Disease-wise, the big one globally is coffee leaf rust, CLR. You see these orange, powdery spots on the leaves. It can devastate yields if not managed. Control often involves protective copper sprays or systemic fungicides, timed with seasonal patterns.
Okay.
But there are others too. Various spots on leaves and berries, pink disease, black rot, different blights. And sometimes secondary infections can make problems like dieback even worse.
And pests?
Oh yeah. Scale insects are a major one. Little green bugs that suck sap, produce sticky honeydew, which then grows sooty mold, can cause huge cherry loss.
Oh,
Control can be insecticides, but there's a growing push for biological control, using tiny parasitic wasps that attack the scales. Then there's the real nightmare, the coffee berry borer, or CBB.
that sounds bad.
It is. Tiny beetle, the female tunnels right into the developing cherry to lay eggs. The larvae eat the bean from the inside out. Losses can be massive, 30%, sometimes even up to 80% in severe infestations. It loves shade, dense planting, unpruned trees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Plus, you've got other borers, leafhoppers, leaf miners, caterpillars, cicadas. Managing them all requires an integrated approach.
Yep.
Good farm hygiene, proper pruning, sometimes targeted chemicals, promoting natural enemies. It's complex.
It's just incredible. The sheer amount of work, knowledge, and constant vigilance needed for just one coffee plant, let alone whole farms.
Well, it
Astounding.
really is.
So, okay, the cherries have survived pests and disease. They're perfectly ripe. What happens at harvest?
Yeah.
How do you get from that red cherry to the green bean we export?
Harvesting is the critical moment for quality. You absolutely must pick only the perfectly ripe, uniform red cherries, by hand, usually,
Why so strict?
because if you pick unripe, green or yellow ones, you get raw, grassy, unpleasant flavors in the cup. Pick overripe, dark red or black ones. They're hard to pulp, the parchment gets discolored, leads to fermented off flavors. The absolute Goldie rule is you cannot improve bean quality after picking. You can only preserve it or degrade it.
Okay, quality locked in at harvest. Then what?
Speed is crucial. You need to pulp the cherries, remove the outer skin and fleshy pulp, ideally within 8 hours of picking. Machines do this. Large factories use big disc pulpers. Smallholders often have smaller hand-cranked or motorized drum pulpers. Proper adjustment is key to avoid damaging the parchment surrounding the bean.
Right, so skin and pulp off. What's left?
You're left with the bean still coated in this sticky, sugary layer called mucilage. Now comes fermentation. The beans sit, usually in tanks with water, for about, say, 36 hours. Natural microbes break down that mucilage.
Why ferment?
It's crucial for developing the coffee's flavor precursors, but it has to be even. If you mixed unripe and overripe cherries, they ferment at different rates, leads to inconsistency. Some processors even do an extra underwater soak after fermentation. Can lead to a cleaner, brighter cut profile, though maybe makes the parchment a bit brittle.
Interesting technique. Then drying. Right.
Yes, drying is next. Sun drying is often preferred for quality. Beans are spread on raised beds or patios, turned regularly, allows for slow, even drying, good air circulation, prevents musty taints, helps develop complexity.
But slow.
Slow, yes, takes time. Mechanical dryers are faster, use heat, but more expensive to run and need careful management to avoid drying too fast or unevenly.
Okay, dried beans. Then what happens at the dry factory?
Right. The beans arrive in their protective parchment layer. First step is hulling, removing that dry parchment. Then often polishing to remove the final thin layer, the silver skin. This is best done when moisture content is just right, around 10-12%. Too wet or too dry causes problems.
Got it.
After that, it's all about grading, cleaning, sorting. Beans are passed through screens to sort by size. They're checked for defects, broken beans, insect damage, etc. This determines the final grade, like A, B, Y grade, and so on, ready for export.
Such a precise journey, tree to green bean. Now let's zoom out. Talk about the economic engine behind this. How's the industry actually structured? Say, in a place like Papua New Guinea.
Right. In PNG, it's overwhelmingly smallholders. Farmers with, less than 5 hectares, they account for something like 95% of all the coffee production. Over 500,000 growers, typically managing shaded plots. Coffee is their main cash crop.
95%? That's huge.
It is. There are also some larger block holders, maybe around 20 hectares, often communal groups, but their number has declined. And plantations averaging maybe 60 hectares, fewer than 15 now, down from over 150 historically.
Wow, big shift.
Yeah. So the beans flow from these growers to licensed private exporters. There were about 21 back in 2015. They're regulated by the Coffee Industry Corporation, CIC, to ensure fair pricing based on global markets. That year, 2015, PNG exported just under 43,000 tons, worth nearly 400 million kina.
Serious money.
Absolutely. Most is exported green, but like you mentioned, there's a growing interest in local roasting, specialty coffee, even capsules for Europe now. PNG coffee is mostly Arabica, about 97%, with just a little Robusta.
That's a massive economic footprint. How did this structure, the CIC and all that, come about? What's the history there?
Well, P&G has put a lot of effort into managing its coffee sector over the years.
Uh,
It started formally back in '76 with the Coffee Industry Board, the CIB. Then issues cropped up, like a major problem called overbearing dieback affecting the trees. So research became crucial. The Coffee Research Committee formed, then the Coffee Research Institute, CRI, in '86.
Okay.
Also in '86, they discovered coffee leaf rust, CLR, which was a huge threat. That led to the Coffee Development Agency, CDA, in '87, focused on helping farmers combat it. Finally, in 1991, they decided to bring it all together.
Uh-huh.
The CIB, CRI, and CDA were merged into one body. The Coffee Industry Corporation Limited, the CIC we have today, it oversees regulation, research, extension, the whole lot.
Makes sense to consolidate.
Yeah. And when smallholders sell their coffee, buyers use things called outturn ratios to figure out the price, like how much green bean you expect to get from a kilo of cherry or a kilo of parchment. Moisture content is also checked carefully.
Right. Quality checks all the way. It's fascinating. Biology, economics. But coffee is so much more than that, isn't it? It's woven into culture, society. Let's talk about that cultural tapestry.
Absolutely. The origin story itself is legendary. You know, the tale of Kaldi, the goat herder in Ethiopia, way back around 850 CE.
Vaguely, yeah. The energetic goats.
That's the one. He notices his goats get super lively after eating berries from a certain bush, tries them himself, feels the same alertness. That's supposedly our first clue about coffee's power. Of course, the caffeine itself probably evolved in the plant for other reasons, maybe deterring pests, maybe attracting pollinators. We don't know for sure.
So from this accidental discovery, how did it spread and turn into the drink we know?
Well, early uses were varied. People apparently brewed tea from the leaves or mixed the berries with animal fat for, like, energy balls.
Energy balls.
Yeah. But it really took off as a beverage in the Middle East around the 1450s. A Sufi leader in Yemen supposedly introduced it for religious rituals, helping people stay awake for prayers. Then the Ottoman Empire really popularized roasting and grinding the beans for that darker brew we're more familiar with. It wasn't always smooth sailing, though. There was controversy. In Mecca, 1511, it was actually prosecuted by a religious court, briefly banned before being allowed again.
Wow, banned. Why?
Concerns about its stimulating effects may be distracting from religious piety. But what's key is what happened next. Coffee houses. They popped up in places like Damascus, Istanbul. And they weren't just places to drink coffee, they were social hubs. Entertainment, debate, news, creativity, ideas just flowed.
It's like the internet cafes of their day.
Kinda, yeah. And this idea traveled. Via the Ottomans, coffee reached Europe. London's first coffee house opened in 1650. By 1663, there were over 80.
80
Yeah.
in just 13 years.
Incredible growth. King Charles II even tried to ban them in 1675, saw them as places of potential sedition, maybe? But they were too popular. They thrived as these intellectual centers. Scientists like Robert Hooke gave demonstrations in them.
So they really were these social and intellectual melting pots.
Hugely influential. Think about it. Coffee started replacing beer and wine as the standard breakfast drink. Imagine the shift in society. Suddenly, people are starting their workday alert and focused, not, slightly buzzed from ale.
Big difference.
Massive. And these coffee houses became known as penny universities. For the price of a coffee, anyone rich or poor could come in, listen, debate, learn, free exchange of ideas, less social hierarchy. Some argued this atmosphere really fueled the Enlightenment.
That's powerful. And coffee even played a role in actual revolutions.
Directly. The Boston Tea Party, 1773. Iconic moment leading to the American Revolution. Where was it planned?
Don't tell me.
In a coffee house. Boston's Green Dragon Tavern. Colonists were furious about the British Tea Act, taxation without representation. They dumped the tea. Suddenly, drinking tea becomes unpatriotic in America, and who steps in? French and Dutch merchants flood the market with cheap coffee. Many say that's what cemented America's love affair with coffee. It became the patriotic drink.
Wow. From goats to revolutions. What a history. So how does all that rich past manifest in our modern coffee habits?
Well, today, coffee's just everywhere, isn't it? For so many people, it's not just a drink, it's this automatic daily ritual, a habit we barely think about. Picked up nicknames too, like Java from the Indonesian island, a huge early producer.
Right.
And we've seen cultural waves. The second wave was the rise of big coffee chains, think Starbucks. Emphasis shifted to quality guests, but also the experience, the cafe vibe, fancy drinks, customization.
Okay.
Then came the third wave, which is much more artisanal, focus on specialty coffee. Where exactly did the beans come from? Single origin, how are they roasted? Light, medium, dark, how are they brewed? Pour over, AeroPress, French press.
Much more detail.
Exactly. And often a much stronger emphasis on ethical sourcing, sustainability, direct relationships with farmers. Plus, now we have the convenience of RTD ready-to-drink coffees in cans and bottles.
And what about energy drinks? Seems like they carved out a niche for that quick jolt, too.
They definitely did. Drinks like Red Bull actually have roots in a Thai drink, Krating Deng, from the 80s. It was reformulated and marketed to Europe in 87.
Yeah.
They often pack more sugar than coffee, which maybe appeals more to younger people. But yeah, they delivered a similar caffeine hit, another option for that energy boost.
It's clear coffee is more than just a crop or a drink. It's a global cultural force. But let's get personal. What's it actually doing to us? Let's talk physiology.
Rare the science bit. It's pretty cool how it works. Basically, your brain has receptors for a chemical called adenosine. Adenosine builds up during the day and signals that it's time to get sleepy.
Okay, the sleep signal.
Right. Caffeine has a similar molecular structure, so it fits into those adenosine receptors, like parking in its spot. But caffeine doesn't activate the sleepy signal, it just blocks adenosine from getting in.
So it stops the brakes from being applied.
Exactly.
Oh.
Result: you feel less tired, more alert. Plus, caffeine triggers the release of other neurotransmitters, like dopamine, the feel-good chemical, helps with focus and motivation and adrenaline, which gives you that little energy surge, that buzz.
So it's not just waking us up, it's actively making us feel more alert, focused, maybe even better mood.
That's the perception, yes. Helps kickstart the day, provides that boost, and potentially there are longer-term health aspects, too. Some studies suggest coffee might offer protection for the liver against things like sclerosis, even some cancers. And there's research linking it to a lower risk of dementia.
Interesting. But downsides?
There can be. Some evidence points towards a possible increased risk of heart disease for certain people or with very high consumption. It's complex. The general advice, like from the FDA, is usually around a maximum of 4 cups a day, roughly 400 milligrams of caffeine. And it's generally not recommended for pregnant women due to potential effects on the fetus or for people with chronic heart issues, high blood pressure, or serious sleep problems. Moderation is key.
Oh.
And for a really weird effect, NASA did an experiment in '95, gave caffeine to spiders
Spiders. Why?
to study toxicity, I think.
Uh-huh.
The caffeinated spider spun these incredibly bizarre, disorganized, almost non-functional webs. Just shows how profoundly it can affect physiology, even across species.
Wow. That's wild.
And then there's the story, purely anecdotal, mind you, of Creme Puff, the world's oldest cat, lived to 38. Her owner swore by her diet, which included coffee with cream.
Okay, maybe don't try that with your cat. But fascinating range of effects.
Oh, wow.
Let's shift, though, to the darker side of our coffee habits, environment, ethics.
Right. There are definitely some significant challenges there. Disposable cups are a huge one. The main issue is that thin plastic lining inside most paper cups. It makes them waterproof, but also means they can't be recycled easily in standard paper recycling systems.
So they just end up where?
Landfill, mostly.
Yeah.
Billions of them every year, contributing to waste and potentially breaking down into microplastics. Awareness is growing, people are using reusable mugs more, but the scale is still enormous.
And capsules, pods. Convenient, but
Same issue, different form factor. Nespresso pods, invented back in '75, brilliant for convenience, but most are aluminium or plastic, often with silicone linings. They need special recycling. You usually have to collect them and send them back to the company or specific drop-off points. Many people just don't. Research is happening on compostable pods, but they're not widespread yet.
So convenience versus waste.
It's a trade-off, though to be fair, capsule machines are often quite energy efficient. They only heat the exact water needed for one shot, so it's not all bad.
Okay. And what about addiction? Is caffeine addiction a real thing?
It's complicated. You can definitely develop a dependence, meaning you feel like you need caffeine to function normally to get through the day. If you're dependent and stop suddenly, you can get withdrawal symptoms. Things like headaches, irritability, fatigue, low mood, lack of energy.
Sounds unpleasant.
It can be, yeah. But typically, caffeine withdrawal is relatively mild and short-lived compared to, say, withdrawal from harder drugs. Usually peaks within 12-24 hours and resolves in a few days. But that feeling of needing it can be powerful for some.
Right. These are definitely things to think about with every cup. So looking ahead, what's the future hold for coffee, especially with these big challenges?
The future is uncertain. Climate change is probably the single biggest threat. Remember that bean belt near the equator where coffee grows best. Global warming is shrinking it. Higher temperatures, changing rainfall patterns. It's stressing the plants. One study from 2019 estimated that 60% of wild coffee species are at risk of extinction, including the genetic relatives of Arabica, which produces most of the world's beans. That's worrying for long-term resilience.
60%, that's huge.
It is. And beyond climate, there are ongoing ethical concerns. Coffee farming is hard work. In many parts of the world, workers still face poor conditions, inadequate pay, echoes of colonial exploitation in some regions. Ensuring fair labor practices remains a major challenge.
So how is the industry trying to tackle this? Are there solutions?
There are definitely efforts underway. Sustainability certifications are a big part of it. You see labels like Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, UTZ, Organic. These organizations try to promote better practices. They set standards covering social aspects, worker rights, safety, no child labor, environmental aspects protecting biodiversity, limiting chemical use, managing waste, and economic aspects aiming for fair prices, stable incomes for farmers.
How does that work?
Farms apply, get evaluated, audited regularly. It's a way to provide assurance to consumers and incentivize better practices on the ground. And looking further out, scientists are working on breeding more resilient coffee varieties, hybrids that can perhaps tolerate higher temperatures or resist diseases better. Innovation is key to adapting.
It seems like a constant effort on multiple fronts. Well, from that maybe mythical herd of goats discovering energetic berries to becoming this daily ritual fueling billions, coffee's journey is just incredible, shaping history, culture, our own mornings.
It really is, and it leaves us with some big questions, doesn't it? Given this complex past, the intricate biology, its huge social role, and these very real environmental and ethical hurdles, what's our responsibility as people who enjoy coffee? How do our choices impact its future? And what would the world really look like if that bean belt does shrink significantly, as predicted? Hopefully, understanding this whole journey helps us all make more informed choices going forward.